right, Bill, that was a fun one, man. I got to say, when you have people tell their story and where they started from, saying 1800s caught me a little bit off guard, man. That might be the longest I've heard, but hell of an interview there. That was fun.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Usually you hear somebody's been in the dental space for 15, 20 years, you're like, wow, that's a long time. But when your family's been in the dental space and you haven't left since the 1800s, you got a lot of built-up knowledge to share, and Paren certainly did.
Oh, yeah, crazy important topic. Just learning that the shift from clinician to CEO. Yeah. They don't teach you that in dental school. Yeah, you can learn by trial and error, kind of like you and I did, right? But it makes more sense to get a little bit of coaching and be a little more proactive in making that mindset shift. So you guys are going to really enjoy this episode we just had with Perrin DesPortes with the Next Level Executive. Enjoy, guys.
Welcome to Dental Momentum, the podcast dedicated to lively discussions on business and financial strategies tailored for dental business owners. At Duckett Ladd, we're committed to transforming your business journey and supporting you at every stage. Join us as we delve into the keys to long-term practice success, from cutting-edge accounting and strategic tax planning to personalized business strategies. Together, let's propel your dental practice forward with unstoppable momentum.
All right, Bill, man, we talk all the time, right, about dental school, right, going to dental school. It's clinical, right? They're teaching these doctors how to be clinicians. They're not telling them or teaching them how to run a business. We see the same thing when we're talking about accounting firms, right? We went to school, we didn't learn how to be a business owner. We just got thrown in it, and you figure it out as you go, right? But we got a guy here who really can talk about how, kind of take that clinician to the CEO in Perrin. So it's going to be a fun conversation.
Yeah, you bet. This is something that I think every dentist needs to sit down and really think long and hard about where they are kind of in their business acumen. And, it's okay if you don't have it because, like you said, you weren't taught that. So, that just is an indicator you might need some help. And, just from anecdotal evidence of my clients that are in Perrin's group, I just hear awesome things, and just really wanted to get you on here, Paren, just to allow you to kind of tell us a little bit, about the group, but then really spend more time just kind of unpacking, how business owners can get better as better executives. And that's kind of the name of your business. So we'll throw it to you, man. It's great to have you on here. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you got going on, man?
Yeah, Bill and Jared, thank you so much for the invitation and the time. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a little while. And like you say, we have some mutual clients that are building world beater businesses. And, I love learning about your work through them every bit as much. I will say that, come on, guys, we all build a business through trial and error, don't we? We're just the ones who've
day in and day
out. Yeah.
Daily errors. Is that the trial and error?
Yeah,
the error part
exactly. So I think, the three of us have literally lived to tell the tale about it. And we both get the privilege of working with a lot of entrepreneurs who happen to be healthcare practice owners. And many of them have stepped on quite a few landmines, and they too have lived to tell the tale. It doesn't mean that's the best way to build a business. And I think, in the world that we live in now, be it interest rate driven, be it employee orientation, be it cost escalation, the margins are getting razor thin, and if you and I were having this conversation a decade ago when I first started working in the group practice space, maybe lending rates being lower, the rising tide lifting all boats, you could afford as a practice owner, you could afford to take a bigger swing at some things and maybe not sink the boat with a bad bet. And I just don't think that's the case nowadays. And I think some of that's born out of competitive strategy and competitive environment overall. But I think the dynamics around running a multi-site healthcare business are incredibly challenging. We can dive into a lot of different aspects of that. Let me also say, though, that I am very, very bullish about the practice of dentistry and the emerging group space. And I'll just maybe put a cherry on that comment by saying that when we do, as business owners and as executives of business, as leaders of businesses, when we are in a rising tide that lifts all boats type of an environment, it's hard to get our team to pay any attention to what we're saying, because everybody's awash in cash. Every patient is saying yes to our treatment. Everybody's making more money. Success abounds. There's no urgency. There's no threat. There's nothing to say that if we push our team too far, some of them won't up and leave for an easier street next door, or the grass being greener. The game changes when there's economic pressure, when there's, I hate to put it this way, rising unemployment, when there are greater costs and greater borrowing costs to running a business. All of a sudden, people sit up straight, they pay more attention to what you have to say, and they're more apt to trust your leadership if you've earned that trust. I think that's the environment that we've started in over the course of the last probably 12 to 18 months. And I think that's a really great thing for people who are confident business leaders, who are effective executives, and understand really how their business fits together. So look forward to diving into a little bit of all of that maybe with you today.
Well, why don't you dive in and unpack just a little bit? You said 10 years, right? Just tell a little bit about your background to where you got, to where you are.
Yeah. How much time you got? So,
well,
I'll be brief. I was born into a family-held business that happened to be a dental distribution business called Thompson Dental Company. The company was headquartered in Columbia, South Carolina, where I grew up, and the company was founded in 1899 by my great-grandfather, James Paren Thompson. Back in those days, he had 2 daughters, and back in those days, you didn't leave businesses to women, and so there were 2 operating businesses for the company in Charleston, South Carolina, and Raleigh, North Carolina. And he left each of those branches to his sons-in-law, one who was a very diplomatic, level-headed business executive, my grandfather, and the other guy who was a crazy person. So my grandfather ended up taking over that second location in Raleigh, North Carolina. When I came into the business in 1995, my father was president and CEO. The company had about 14 locations. On the run rate of about $100 million in revenue. It employed over 400 people. I have no idea how many customers it served, but the branches stemmed from about Baltimore, Maryland through Orlando, Florida. A very big regional business, debt funded, family held. One of the challenges around a business such as that is equity transitions from one generation to another. And my father has 2 sisters, neither of whom worked in the business, and nor did their husbands, nor did any of their children. They were owners in the business, but not operators, and certainly not employees. Upon my grandfather's ultimate demise, his estate was set up to be share and share alike between my father and his 2 sisters. So you and I don't have to be accountants, finance specialists, or even math majors to figure out how the voting shares equate to 2/3 of the equity being held by people who don't want anything to do with the business, and 1/3 being held by the person charged with running it. And so while my grandfather was still in decent health at the time, my father basically saw what the writing on the wall was and decided to take the business to market and sell it in April of 2002, and Patterson was the logical suitor for that business. Patterson acquired Thompson in April of 2002. It ended up being their most successful dental acquisition of all time. Most of the employees made the cut to stay on with the business. They consolidated a lot of market share. And I ended up having a 15-year career running 3 different businesses for them between Richmond, Virginia, Metro New York, New Jersey, and then Charlotte for the last 7 years of my career. I learned more about executive leadership in a publicly traded company in those 15 years at Patterson than arguably I ever would have working for my father. And a lot of the lessons that I share in the Next Level Executive Program are born out of the crucible moments of those 15 years at Patterson. Some dramatic successes and some, setbacks, I'll say, or more challenging times. But I count that as being instrumental in learning about what business was supposed to be in a publicly traded setting. And I always had someone above me that I could model my development, my professional development, and to a degree my executive behavior after, because I could see the way that leadership looked 1 to 2 to 3 rungs above me. And I think that's one of the challenges that we'll talk about today with your clients and mine, is that dentists who buy or build their first practice become the top of the food chain automatically, and they don't understand what professional development means. They understand what clinical skill development means, but not professional development from an executive and a leadership standpoint. I left Patterson in January of 2017 to launch a business called Tusk Partners that was a consulting business and an M&A transactional advisory business that helped entrepreneurial dentists predominantly build and exit successful group practices. I left Tusk along with my co-founding partner Diwakar Sinha in March of 2021 to launch a competitor called Polaris Healthcare Partners that basically did the same thing. And over the last, better part of a decade, I've spent all of my working career in the group practice space, either working as a consultant for people helping to grow group practices successfully, or from a debt recapitalization or a transaction advisory standpoint. And now I'm a solopreneur working with people in the emerging group space that might have a slower growth path, but want to build a successful business methodically, I'll say, and they may or may not want to sell it down the road. So I do more coaching than I do consulting right now, but it's a nice amalgamation of 3 decades worth of experience being an executive and an entrepreneur that I get to share.
Paren, I'd say you're the only person I think I can honestly say has dentistry in your blood, man. I mean, this thing literally, I don't know if I've ever heard anybody that goes back to the 1800s as far as their involvement or their family's involvement in dentistry. I want to go back to a point in time, and I'm going to put you on the spot and see if you can kind of riff off of this, because this is something Jared and I are very passionate about. And we were actually talking about this morning, which is the dynamics of a family business and, generational transfers and things like that. So maybe not specifically to your situation with non-owners, but go talk to some of those folks who are building great practices that are having family issues, maybe transition issues to the second gen or whatever the case may be. What kind of advice would you give to those people who struggle or are struggling with that, trying to balance that family and keep it intact while also doing what's right by the business and the patients?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bill. And I can take this in a couple of different ways, but I'll talk a little bit about the family dynamic of things and both the family unit itself as well as possibly intergenerational transfer. But a lot of what I will tell you counts every bit as much for this associate partnership conundrum that so many people find themselves in. Because at the core of all that, we're dealing with equity. We're dealing with ownership and the responsibility we have to the business that we own, certainly the patients and the people who work in it. But I think there are a handful of things. First and foremost, there was 8 to 10 years ago an opportunity to build prolific group practices, and there every bit is as much today. Now, the lending rate environment is a little bit different, but the competitive strategy and the competitive outlook in building a multi-site group, if that's what you want to do, counts every bit as much today as it did 8 to 10 years ago when I first started. The key is, do we want to take the risk to personally guarantee a lot of loans to build a bigger business if that business is in conflict with what we profess to be our most important objective, which is maintaining a healthy family and personal life? And I would tell you that I saw on too many occasions people taking unnecessary and uncalculated risk, usually around the aspect of 7 to 10 year loans from a bank, to build an ego-driven business that became more stressful, more detrimental to cash flow, and all to a great degree unwieldy, that was at the expense of their family and their personal life. So when we take the risk to build a business and it costs us a divorce, or we have kids that don't talk to us and we have heart health issues, that's not winning to me. Okay, so we have to build a business that's congruent with the life that we want to lead. That's like a broad brush statement. When we start talking about equity, be it family owners and a transition of equity, or be it potential partners, call it associates, for lack of a better term, there's a difference in agreement and alignment. And I think it's really important for us to understand that distinction, because the business has to come first. Okay, and this is what a lot of people get wrong. They incorrectly think that a business is just an ATM. You know, you have one and I have one, and I know that when I need more money, I just go to the ATM and pull out a lot of cash for whatever I want, right? Well, not exactly. And you all have a payroll to manage. I no longer do. So between the two of you as partners, you're not going to agree with each other all the time. But you have to be in alignment for what you want the future of the business to be. And whatever you may disagree about in terms of partners is you're fighting for what you think is in the best interest of the business, not yourselves individually first. And so when we start talking about intergenerational transfer, you have a son or a daughter or, you know, someone who's in dental school coming out, that can be a great thing. What are their interests from a business ownership standpoint? Because that's different from a clinician. Owners get paid last. They put the interest of the staff and the business ahead of their own. Certainly from a cash flow standpoint, the buck literally stops with them. When they get paid last, they have to make hard decisions that benefit the business before it benefits them, and certainly before it benefits the employees. And these are things that you mentioned, like jokingly a little bit earlier, Jared, that people don't learn this in dental school or medical school or getting a master's in accounting or something. That's totally true. You're not going to go out of business because you guys can't process tax returns, to be trite. A dentist isn't going to go out of business because they can't cut crown preps. They're going to go out of business because they can't manage a payroll, or they over-lever the business and create demands on the business that it can't solve for and they can't solve for in the process. And this is a massive problem that we see typically between a founder who may be late stage of his or her career and a young associate who might be earlier stage of the career, that the people want something different and they don't have the hard conversations before they entertain partnership. They put the partnership ahead of the hard conversations because nobody wants to talk about that because it's uncomfortable. So what do we do with cash? What do we do with personal responsibilities in the business that aren't necessarily clinician first? And what do we want out of the business in the future? If you are in alignment in those three aspects, the likelihood is that you can solve the business challenges as they come. But if you're out of alignment in any of those three, it makes it really, really difficult.
How often, you said that brilliantly, how often do you see, go back to the uncomfortable conversations, right? Yeah. How often do you see that the inability to have those uncomfortable conversations early leads to, I'll say it, an explosion or something blowing up down the road?
It leads to challenges the vast majority of the times, and all but immediately. And look, whether it's an accounting firm partnership or a dentistry partnership or a widget factory partnership, the simple fact is those that own the business or are going into business in a partnership construct simply don't know the questions to ask because they have not lived the experience and the downside as a result of a failed partnership. Now, I said that I was in a business that we started back in 2017 called Tusk Partners, an absolutely successful brand and incredibly successful business that, if I give us one credit, it's timing the market right. And we created a lot of success for ourselves and for a lot of our clients. But there were things baked in that partnership, they're destined to fail. And we didn't know the questions to ask. And we ended up building a business to advise people on not making the same mistakes that we had. So I'm not here to tell you the top 10 books to read on partnerships or anything else, because if they do, if they exist, I haven't found them yet. But I will tell you that it is with great reason that I built several components of the Next Level Executive Program, not trying to be self-serving here, but I've got an entire handful of sessions around those uncomfortable conversations to have. And some of them, subject matter wise, are what I alluded to earlier. If you can have those conversations preemptively to really nurture and bring a young associate or a young family member along and say, you know, Jared, tell me how you live your personal life. You know, if you make $100,000 more in income this year than you did last year, what are you going to do with it? And if you say, woohoo, Paren, I'm buying some new cars and a beach house, you know, okay, you're going to take on a lot of fixed debt that's going to put pressure on the business. And now I have to make decisions as the business leader on how we allocate distributions because I know that you're going to need them. We don't have a war chest of cash to fall back on because your personal spending habits just created problems for the business. On the other hand, if you say, look, I need to squirrel away cash, I need to pay down some debt, I want to build up some cash reserves, you know, to fund a kid's college fund or something like that. That tells me that you got a prudent mindset around how we manage cash out of the business, and it's not going to place demands on the decisions we make on a quarterly basis. So these are the types of things that if we can have those conversations uncomfortably, if we can use them in an educational format, the likelihood is that we get our associates or our family members more mind ready around what business ownership really looks like after 5 p.m., right?
Yeah, so, I mean, I'd say that's something that Jared and I can say we're somewhat passionate about too, because we've been in partnerships where I think the alignment wasn't there. And, you know, I always say that Jared and I were just as big a part of the problem as anybody because we didn't have the conversations. Now we've kind of learned it's like micro explosion, so you don't have that big macro explosion that blows up something that you've worked really hard for. And, you know, I think we've just seen that there's some dentists that are kind of heading that way. So let me ask you this, Paren. Let's say that someone is already involved in a associateship or maybe a family member, and they've never thought about this, but then now they realize the necessity is there to have these conversations. They have these conversations, and we're not aligned at all. You know, you want to buy a Lambo, and I'm trying to get my kid through college.
Is that what you want, Bill? Lambo?
No, I don't want to. You know, my wife would. That's the last thing I'm going to have. But hey, Jared, we're pretty aligned when it comes to that thing. We don't. Neither one of us. If you see Jared's pickup truck he drives,
Lamborghini does make an SUV, just for the record. Okay, I'm just saying. I'm not trying to be a bad
we'll make
influence.
some kind of tax write-off for it, right? Of course, yeah. That's how we'll justify it. But what if that's the case? What if you have someone who's what you deem to be integral into the operations, but you're just not aligned, you know, initially?
Yeah, it does not mean that they're a lost cause. It could, but it doesn't have to default to that. I think this, again, is where, look, when young people get out of school and they enter the professional work environment and they start to make money, we're all capitalists at heart. We like spending money. We like taking nice trips. We like kids in private school. I don't begrudge any of that. I am not a miser by any stretch, and I'm fairly proactive as it relates to cash flow and debt and everything like that. But I get it. I mean, we want to we worked our tails off. We want to have a little bit of fun, and there's nothing wrong with that. When we start making decisions on a personal level that involved fixed debt obligations, that's where the conversation takes on a dramatically different tone, because those are things that are really challenging to unwind in a short period of time. So if you have somebody who does want a Lambo, or, you know, wants to move into a bigger home or start a family, you know, and they have demands on their income, that's quite all right. But it's up to us as seasoned business owners to educate them, to nurture them along on what it looks like to manage your family finances prudently and understand what cash flow and reasonable debt versus unreasonable debt might look like. Those are, to me, those are good mentorship type conversations. Every bit as much as you're going to have similar mentorship conversations around the leadership components of if that person does end up coming into the ownership ranks of the business, what are our non-clinical expectations of them moving forward to help build a bigger or build a better business into the future. And I think these are great opportunities for us to share our experiential wisdom with young people. It doesn't mean that they're a write-off. Some of them very well may be. They may make they may be highly productive as clinicians and generate a tremendous amount of income. But if they have a habit of making foolish decisions, then when people show you who they are, you need to trust that.
Yeah, that's good. Let's transition back to, I keep thinking about Lambos now. Let's keep transitioning back to like what you do at next level executive. Like, does it, if you're looking at that dental practice owner, when should they start shifting their mindset from clinician to that executive? Or is it always, you've got to always have both? Like you just always have to be thinking like that?
Well, I think it's prudent to have both, but I'll tell you, depending on what the founder owner wants, it takes on a dramatic weight in the teeter-totter, if you will. And what I describe is that the people I work with typically have been practice owners for a while. They probably worked with a dental practice management to create systems and processes and repeatable outcomes over time on the operational side of the business. And they've probably also taken some level of advanced clinical education, so they can do a lot of complicated clinical stuff that typically generates higher levels of revenue. So these are people who have very stable, very solid practices that tend to yield consistent, enviable cash flow. And at that point, you and I know you're already thinking of like a bunch of names in your Rolodex, your mental Rolodex here, because we all know a lot of them. They've created very successful practices that are probably 1.5 to 2x or more the ADA average. Fair. Mm-hmm. And those people are also typically mid-career, and when they reach that level, they start wondering what's next. And they have Groundhog Day because success creates a little bit of complacency from time to time. And when you have people that are experiencing the same day, same week, same month over and over and over again, and are at that level of success, my fear is that they start making bad business decisions. They buy a practice because it's for sale, not because it logically fits with what their strategy is. So if I can get to them soon enough and say, listen, if you want to be a clinician who owns a successful practice for the rest of your career, God love you. It's great. Don't mess with it. You've got a good thing going. Kudos to you. If you're contemplating possibly building a bigger business through adding locations, buy or build, possibly bringing in more associates or potentially even partners, and or building a business that starts to free up your personal time away from clinical services or even executive responsibilities, a business that might be a complement to a different purpose in life that you want to lead. Now you're starting to enter the world of being an entrepreneur who owns a business, not a clinician who owns a practice. And those are not the same things. So if we want to go down that road of being an entrepreneur, we have to understand how our business truly fits together. Because if we start adding additional locations, or if we start expanding the current facility, renovating it and adding operatories to accommodate more associates, or we start bringing associates into partnership structures, how do we do that? And how is the business supposed to fit together? Because now when we start making decisions, those decisions have secondary and tertiary repercussions down the road. And if you're not aware of what those repercussions are, you make a decision in the moment that shuts a door down the road that you didn't intend. So this is a trite way of putting it, but it kind of goes from playing checkers to playing chess, right? And this is where people who maybe not want to build a bigger business, 8 to 10 years ago, they were just doing it. They were just borrowing more money from a bank and building or buying more locations. I think today's mindset is, I might want to do that, I might not. But before I do that, I'm going to figure out how this thing fits together, and I'm going to have better grounding in what the business is. And I'm going to think long and hard about the business that I want to take the risk to build on top of this, and make sure it's congruent with what I really want out of life. And that's really where I start to come in, and I talk about this thing called being an effective executive or being a full cycle entrepreneur. Those are not the same things, but they are a complement to one another if done correctly.
So, Perrin, let's take that clinician who's built a really, like you said, enviable practice that's doing really well. They don't know what's next. They don't know what they don't know. So they come to you. What kind of gaps do you typically see? You've talked a little bit about some of the strategy, M&A, things like that. But other than that, even like when it comes to dealing with staff, so on and so forth, day-to-day operations, what kind of gaps are you seeing that these clinicians are just missing when it comes to becoming a great executive?
Yeah, I think I'll give you one that's conceptual and one that's practical. And why don't we start with the practical one, because this I know will be near and dear to your collective hearts, or your philosophies, knowing how you operate with clients. You can never have enough cash on the sidelines, okay? And so cash buys you flexibility, it creates margin for error, and it buys you time. And I don't think that people understand that clearly enough. And I'll be specific here. So when somebody says, hey, Paren, I found this practice that I want to buy, and your worst nightmare is, hey, Bill and Jared, I bought this practice that came on the market. And they didn't tell you about it ahead of time, right? It was never in your planning sessions with them. It just, who knew? It was too good to turn down, right? Well, their role is going to be changing, whether they realize it or not. If they're working 3 to 4 to 5 days a week clinically, and they're acquiring another practice, and they haven't thought about how to integrate the practice, is it a practice that meets with our systems and processes and clinical philosophies and revenue cycle management? Are we promoting somebody from within our team to work in that business? Am I, as the founder, going to work 2 days a week in my core practice and 2 days a week in the recently acquired practice? And oh, by the way, we want the seller to stay on to maintain the continuity of cash flow, but we didn't realize that they're going to undermine the culture that we're trying to build in that new location now either. All of a sudden, when we don't have a war chest of cash and we have to adapt our role to the changing environment of adding additional locations, if we don't have a war chest of cash to fall back on, now it puts our family in conflict with what our growth strategy is. Okay, so seemingly something as inconsequential as having 6 to 12 months worth of operating reserves on the sidelines to make these types of decisions will not allow for flexibility. All right.
Yeah. So clients that are listening, parents said it as well. 6 to 12 months, right?
It's not just us, right?
That's right. I mean, more is better. I mean, I do think that, you reach a point of having so much available cash that you're turning down legitimate investment opportunities, be it they in the market or a practice to acquire. But the point being, if you don't have 3 to 6 months worth of cash reserves and you are contemplating a change in your role, bringing on an associate or acquiring or building another practice, you're going to find yourself in the short rows with your family really, really quickly. And it's totally avoidable. So this is sort of a practical application of things to be aware of and be able to avoid. And, I spend a good number of teaching sessions in the program talking about all this. The other theoretical or conceptual type of an application on becoming a more adept executive, I'm hesitant to use this word because it's going to fall flat, but it's leadership. Okay, it's leadership. If you and I go on Amazon and we go on the book section and you type in leadership, God help you with how many returns it's going to generate, because there's so many books and concepts and podcasts, for that matter, around leadership. But leadership is real because I've lived it, I've experienced it, I've seen good leadership, and I've seen leadership that was less than that and worked for them back in the corporate America days. If you are going to build a business that's not dependent upon your clinical skill set, it has to have a leader. And if you're the founder, that is going to be you. It's clinical leadership as chief clinical officer, and it's executive leadership or CEO, chief executive officer. So what do the two of those roles actually function in a healthcare practice or an emerging group? And what I would tell you is that your ability to communicate, to reach people intrinsically, to expect more out of them in terms of productivity, and to really get them to follow your lead in terms of the vision you have for the business you're taking the risk to create is incredibly important. I also mentioned the economic environment we're kind of sailing into and maybe the times of trial. During times of trial, leaders communicate effectively and they spend the one currency that they have with their team, and that's trust. And if you have built up the trust of your team to follow you during times of uncertainty, or God forbid, times when they don't agree with what they think your direction is, you know you've earned the trust of your team. So we talk about this from a practical application, not just a theoretical application of what leadership is in an executive role. But I think it's critically important because as an owner of a practice or an owner of an emerging group, again, you don't have anybody above you to really model your behavior after. You don't have anybody to really put you through a course of professional development like you did in your clinical skill development.
Yeah. As you've been doing this a long time and heavily in the group space as well. So let's just say I'm coming to you, and I don't know, I would have to use examples. I'm coming to you, Paren, I'm like, hey, I've got a really good practice. I've got a $2.5, $3 million practice. Maybe I've got an associate. And Paren, I want to grow. I want to get bigger. I want to get, what does bigger mean? Well, maybe I want to add more locations, or maybe I want to add more associates, right? And what are you asking me to try to figure out, like, is that the right move for me? Like, what are you trying to get out of me? And then what would you hear from me to be like, Jared, it's not for you, buddy. Stay with what you're doing. Like, what would that look like?
Yeah, I think there are two key takeaways from this, and I appreciate you asking the question, but hopefully this will be a teaching environment for some of your listeners here. The first one is, how old are you? Are you married? Do you have children? How old are they? Okay, because if you tell me, yeah, I'm married and my kids are 5 and 7, okay, and you have a growth mindset that you want to take on a bunch of debt and acquire or buy or build a bunch of practices, and then you kind of backslide into, in order to spend more time with my family. I would tell you that, much like I talked about alignment before, those are not congruent. Your professional aspirations around building a larger business and buying or building practices could have a phenomenal amount of upside in your local marketplace. It may be a target-rich environment, but nobody builds a group practice to spend more time immediately with their family. We make compromises. And this is where our family life, our personal life, and the business we're building are never going to be in balance, but they have to be congruent with one another. And I've had this conversation, I feel like more than 100 times with people. And they kind of ask me, like, I thought I came here about business growth strategy, and this is a life counseling session. Like, what did I miss when I booked a call with you, Paren? And I just want to be upfront that I've lived this life. I put the business first. I had the travel demands, the stress. I had the sleepless nights. I had the, being home when I wasn't truly mentally present. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. So there's a way to avoid that. Let's just make sure that, first and foremost, the business you want to build is congruent with the family that you want to have. Now, if they are, and if I do get the sense that these are congruent with one another, my next question is going to be, tell me about that $2 to $3 million practice you have. How many operatories does it have? How many associates does it have? If it's a general dentistry practice, how many hygienists does it have? How many days a week is it open? What is the amount of open chair time that you had last month? What is your phone call conversion rate for your marketing spend? What is your case acceptance rate for your treatment presentation? what is the untapped potential in the business that you have?
Data, data, data.
100%.
Yep.
It is absolutely foolish to go off and guarantee a $600,000, $800,000, $1 million loan to buy another business when you have gaps of potential in your core business. And if you can't answer those questions for me on where the gaps are and why they are, then I'm not confident you should take on the risk to build another mess in location number 2. But I also think prudently, you should focus on the potential that you have in your business. It doesn't cost you a dime to get. So let's build from a point of strength, not from a point of ego.
So, Paren, kind of feeding off of that, let's say you get in and you find that the practice is underperforming. And when you get down to it, you maybe see that there's what I would almost call like a abdication of leadership or a leadership vacuum because, that person just doesn't want to mess with it. Maybe that's why their practice is underperforming. What do you tend to find there? What do you tend to find are the conversations you're having with folks who you would say have kind of abdicated key components of what you would consider their leadership responsibilities?
So is this from an owner of a practice that might be coming to me, or an owner of a group or a practice coming to me that we're talking about their core business or an acquisition potential target that they might acquire?
Let's say their core business.
Okay.
That they come to you because they're having issues or they're just not, there's some frustrations they have or they're wanting to grow, but they're not optimized. And I'm assuming that you, through some interview and some Q&A and probably some discussion, you'll get to the point that maybe they've abdicated some of their key roles. So yeah, in their core business, you feel like they aren't being the leaders that they should. Yeah,
so it's a really good question. I don't get this too terribly often, but I have had it before, and I am. I'd like to think, and this is a self-aggrandizing comment, but I'd like to think that I'm honest with people on what I do and what I do not do. And some of that I have to draw the distinction from a prior life when I was a consultant, because I don't do one-on-one consulting. So some of this is, differentiation to a degree. But what you're talking about specifically, Bill, is really something that's driven around practice cultural or operational systems issues when the core practice is underperforming. Now, you mentioned leadership. It all comes back to leadership. All of us as business owners can never abdicate that title. So the buck stops with us, and what we are allowing to happen is a result of our leadership or lack thereof. When you're talking about operational issues or culturally driven issues, that is really an operational construct that's better appropriate for a dental practice management consultant, somebody who's going to live and work in that practice for, 6 to 12 months or something like that, who's going to work on systems and processes and revenue cycle management and hygiene retention and case acceptance and scheduling efficiencies and all that kind of good stuff. I don't do things at an operational level. That being said, they need to fix that before anything around growth strategy, leadership, entrepreneurship, or being a more effective executive is going to take root. So I got to have a firm foundation for a working relationship with them. And sometimes I have to just be honest with them and say, look, you need to double down your efforts with a dental practice management consultant that can shore up all of that before, we take a step to building a bigger business.
So what's that look like tactically with you, Paren? Let's say they want to level up their leadership. They have that in a good spot. How do they work with you regarding, you said not one-on-one. Is it one-on-one? Is it group style? How's it look?
It's a one-to-many model. So
Okay.
I'll be really brief in this. Consulting is typically one-to-one. And the way I used to do it in a prior life was what I would call white glove, meaning I had a toolbox full of tools that I could apply to any multi-site healthcare practice, depending on what the founder wanted to build and what they were trying to do and if they had an exit strategy or not. And that was one-on-one around a defined series of outcomes. They had a business big enough to be able to afford those one-on-one services, and they had a business big enough to apply all of them. Now, there are a lot of people that don't get to that 5 to 10 location set, or maybe they don't want to take the risk to get there. Maybe they have 1 or possibly 2 locations, and they just want to feel like they have better command and control of the business they've taken the risk to own. And if they can be opportunistic around a buy or build opportunity, or they want to talk about, bringing their top 2 or 3 associates into the ownership ranks, how all that fits together. I have a group coaching program called Next Level Executive that I teach to them over Zoom every week. So it's a one-to-many model, and it's got 2 components to it. One is what I call Foundations. It's a 4-quarter program where I send them a video and a deck on Monday morning about whatever the teaching module is that week. And then we get together as a group on Friday to go through a massive Q&A session around that subject matter or anything else that's relevant to them. It's kind of a weekly open forum, if you will. And every quarter, there are probably, 8 or 9 sessions that I teach them over every quarter. And then there are a couple of weeks at the end of every quarter that I reserve for dedicated one-on-one sessions that might be something unique to them or unique about their business or something they want to pick my brain about that wasn't part of the subject matter that quarter. So there is a little bit of one-on-one time with me, but it's not a one-on-one program. And what I've found is that, of the top, 10 to 15 to 20 mistakes that I saw people making along the way of building a group practice, I took all of those along with my experiential wisdom of, having been in an executive roles and entrepreneurial roles, and I distilled all that down into about a 12-month teaching curriculum. And I found that the pace that I distribute that on a weekly basis is digestible for people who are not in any hurry to build a business that's out above their skis, but they just want to go through a learning process of how this thing fits together and how to be a more confident business owner. And they want to have the confidence to make decisions with somebody kind of standing alongside them and saying, yeah, that makes sense, or please don't do that. And I think that's the merits of the program.
Paren, I know before the call you were saying, hey, I don't really want this to be all about me and about the program, but we kind of made it so because I've seen what you've been able to do with some of our clients. Your conversations come up with, in a lot of our calls and just great advice and great passing on of the wisdom that you've accumulated. So somebody listening to the program wants to learn more about the program. How can they find you? How can they get a hold of you?
Well, thanks for that, Bill. I appreciate you letting me hog the mic and be shameless. But the website is thenextlevelexecutive.com, thenextlevelexecutive.com. You can find out a lot about the program in terms of subject matter. There's about a 25-minute video on there where I break down like all the different subjects and the way the program fits together. We have 2 in-person working group sessions every year that is practical application, one around the role of chief clinical officer and one around the role of chief executive officer. So there's a deeper dive into both of those leadership roles. There's also a component of the program called entrepreneurial leadership, which is more of a blank canvas where I get to talk about anything I want to that week. So it's a lot of Paren, honestly, and that may not be everybody's cup of tea. But on the website, you can book a call with me if you want to dive deeper into what your business is, where you are in your journey. Is this program the right fit for you or not? And I'm pretty honest about saying if I think it would be or it wouldn't be or what your expectations should be. And I think it's a program that's built around entrepreneurs who own healthcare practices, not clinicians who own practices. So I would say that all of the people in my group have an entrepreneurial mindset about them, and that makes them really, really fun to work with. They're all very collaborative and very transparent too. So I'm blessed to have a great group of about 30 people in the program, and it's usually a pretty dynamic discussion every Friday.
Love it. Well, Perrin, I can tell you, people will definitely let you hog the mic. People love to hear you talk. Besides us 2 bozos over here, but just listen. Especially the first part, you were going through your partnership journey and everything. I mean, we could have so many other podcast episodes, if you will, that can right off that. And I'm curious about we won't go into it now, but maybe a whole other podcast about the other guy, maybe not your great grandfather, but the other crazy, if that makes sense. That sounds, we could dive deep into that too. But Paren, we appreciate you, man. You've got a lot of experience and definitely highly educated on healthcare practices and how to go from clinician to CEO. So we appreciate you jumping on here for sure.
Look, Bill, Jared, I can't thank you enough for the time and the collaborative partnership, the relationship that I'm developing with y'all. You do great work in this space, and I think we're very congruent around our philosophies and the way businesses should operate, and that's just a refreshing breath of fresh air. So kudos to you. Anytime you want me, all I got's time. So send the bat signal, and I'll hop on the microphone.
I love it. We'll be looking out. We'll send one out. Paren, appreciate you, man.
Got it. Thank you, guys.